Hey everyone, how's it going? Thanks so much for tuning in. Today I'll be wrapping up the majority of the fabrication work on the 62 GMC build. If you missed the last episode, I've got a link to it down in the description below, as well as a link to the entire build playlist, so you can catch up on everything that's been done so far. I want to give a big shout out to GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco for sponsoring this series. In short, we're basically building a budget Restomod by taking the body from a 62 GMC truck and transplanting it onto a 74 Chevrolet C10 frame, and we've got the powertrain and Hydro Boost brake system from a 2004 Cadillac Escalade. So a whole lot of stuff. We're building a Restomod using as many factory available parts as possible, so it'll be easy to service, reliable, and still a whole lot of fun to drive. It's been an amazing journey so far that has not been without its difficulties, but I'll be taking care of all of that in this video. As I've talked about in prior videos, there are some inherent issues with doing this chassis swap. The main thing is that the 74's frame is shaped a bit differently compared to the 62's original frame, so I've had to get really creative when it comes to mounting the body. Unfortunately, the body kind of has the stance of like a stock K10, so it sits higher relative to where the 74's cab would have originally sat, which isn't that big of a deal to me, but what I'm going to end up doing is, instead of having the stance that it does right now, which to me is too high, I want to have it at the stance of like a slightly lowered C10. So with where it is right now, I'm actually going to be lowering the back end about 6 inches and the front end about 4 inches. Even though this has been a tremendous amount of work, it is absolutely going to pay off, because at this point I've basically got the best of both worlds. Classic looks and styling with all of the late model underpinnings, so if I wanted to work on it myself, I can get pretty much any part through any GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco distributor, a GM dealer, or if I sold this to somebody and they didn't want to work on it themselves, they could take it to any service center or GM dealer and actually be able to get work done on it, because it's, you know, Escalade and square body Chevy stuff underneath, which is plentiful. So it's going to be really cool. Of course, I still got a whole lot of work to do, so I'm going to quit chit-chatting and start tackling the front suspension. Now, to achieve a total drop of 4 inches in the front, I'll be using a combination of lowering springs and drop spindles. Of course, all of this that I'm doing is going to be for mock-up purposes. Everything will be blown back apart once the fabrication is complete, so everything can be completely rebuilt from the ground up. I'm not sure how well this comes across on camera, but this is a significant difference. We've got proper 70s muscle car rake at the moment. The front was pretty easy to mock up. The rear is going to be quite a challenge. So let's go ahead and start tackling everything back there so we can see where this thing's actually gonna sit. So I ended up not having to relocate the rear suspension. I got off way easier than I thought I would, and I'm so thankful for it. It was a very simple solution that I just didn't even think of until I was in the moment. So long story short, As part of the flip kit, the kit that lowered the back end 6 inches, there are these axle set plates that the axles sit in, basically. And they get lined up with the little nut that's on top of the leaf spring pack, and they're supposed to be put in a certain orientation, and all I did was do it the opposite way, and it set the axle further forward. Exactly where I needed it within the wheel arch. It could not be any more perfect, so I am over the moon with that. And I have to admit, this stance, that stance is going to be so good. Once again, I'd like to extend a huge thanks to GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco for sponsoring this build. As I move towards completing the truck's structure, I've been in the midst of preparing for a complete rebuild of the chassis and suspension using as many factory-backed parts as possible. That way, there's no guesswork when it comes to reassembly and no concern of long-term reliability. I can trust that the parts that I'm using will work as intended by GM. Even though I'm using lowering components, the way things are going back together will still allow me to use factory control arms, shocks, leaf springs, and shackles. I'll be replacing the parts that are easy to replace and rebuilding everything else, including installing new rear suspension bushings and rebuilding the front lower control arms. Once the chassis comes back from powder coat, I'll certainly have my work cut out for me, but the end result will be as good as it would have been if it rolled off the assembly line. Check out some of the links that I have down in the description below of some of the components that I'm using, and while you're there you can use AC Delco's parts finder to input your vehicle and see what kind of parts they offer for it. At this point, I've finished the general structures for the side steps and the outriggers for the rear bumper. It's all tacked in place. Now, we're going to switch gears and focus back on the front and those front frame horns. My buddy Joe and I were talking about different ideas and whatnot and decided to scrap my original idea and actually build custom frame horns. So Joe's going to be helping me out with that. Let's check out what he's going to come up with. The new frame horns look fantastic. They're so well integrated with the 74 frame that it looks like it could have come that way from the factory. Now we're going to go ahead and rehang the front clip. We got to do some aligning up here just to make sure the rails are even with the new cross member that I put in up front here. So getting the rest of the body put together, we'll be able to dial all that in just right. The frame horns are now lined up. I've got that cross member welded in place, and I also added another brace towards the front just to keep everything together. Joe built a little skeleton structure for each frame horn as well, so everything put together makes this a really strong setup. All that's left to do is figuring out mounting the front bumper once again. The front bumper is almost totally mounted in place. I've gotten the frame horns all figured out. Now I just gotta finish installing the Outriggers. Instead of making custom ones like I did in the back bumper, I'm actually gonna be repurposing the ones that I pulled off of the 74 C10's original front bumper. The one on the passenger side went in no problem. The one on the driver's side I'm probably gonna have to shorten a little bit just because of, you know, where the steering gearbox is located. But all the hard work is done. This is going to be cake compared to everything else. At this point, the truck's structure is complete. There's still some odds and ends that I'll end up having to do off camera, like making braces for the rear fenders and figuring out what I'm going to be doing as far as clearance for the Hydro Boost system. But at this point, I think it's time to roll the truck outside for the first time and see how she's come together. Well, everyone, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you all enjoyed. A big thanks once again to GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco for sponsoring this series. We are at a momentous milestone at the moment. The next thing, aside from doing that little bit of piddly stuff that I talked about a second ago, is breaking the truck all the way back down to the frame, getting everything finished, welded, stripped, and sent off to powder coating. Then we can start rebuilding everything from the ground up. So a lot of work has been done, but there's still a whole lot of work left to do. So if you haven't subscribed already, consider doing so, and make sure you check that notification bell so you can get notified of all of the new uploads. Also, don't forget to leave a like down below because it really helps the videos a lot. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.